I don't think there's any such thing as Republican children or Democratic children. I think the worst thing that could happen to the environment is it becomes the province of a single political party. But you can't talk honestly about the environment in any context today without speaking critically about this president. This is the worst environmental president that we have had in American history. The latest Gallup poll shows 81% of Republicans consider themselves environmentalists, want stronger environmental laws, and want them strictly enforced, of the rank and file. And the problem is the press is not doing its job. The journalist's job is to find the truth and then convey it to the public. And this press corps, the Fourth Estate, has let down the American people. And if this president is reelected, after the job that he has done in destroying so much of this country and so many of the wonderful things, that the values that America represents, it will because the press has not done its job of informing the American public what is happening in this country today. The White House itself has mounted a stealth attack against the environment. They've kept it deliberately secret because they know it would offend the American people if they knew about this. They've used Orwellian rhetoric. When they're going to destroy the forest, they call it the Healthy Forests Act. When they're going to destroy the air, they call it the Clear Skies Bill. But they most insidiously have put polluters in charge of all of the agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution. The head of the Forest Service is a timber industry lobbyist, Mark Ray, the most rapacious timber industry lobbyist in American history. The head of public lands is a mining industry lobbyist, Stephen Griles, who believes that public lands are unconstitutional. The head of the air division at EPA is utility lobbyist Jeffrey Homestead, who's represented nothing but the worst polluters, air polluters in America. The head of Superfund is a woman whose last job was advising corporate polluters how to evade Superfund. The second in command of EPA is a Monsanto lobbyist, and so on and so on. If you go through all of the subsecretariats and all of the agency heads in the Department of Agriculture, Energy, Interior, and EPA, it's the same thing. And these are individuals who have not, as I show in my book, who have not entered government service for the public interest, but rather specifically to subvert the very laws they're now charged with enforcing in order to enrich the president's corporate paymaster. And this is already having a profound effect on quality of life of the American people. The problem is the press is not telling us why this is happening. And so most Americans don't know. And I'll give you a few examples just from the energy industry. A couple of months ago, the New York Times published a report that showed that 1 out of every 4 black children in American cities now has asthma. I have 3 sons who have asthma. We don't know why we're having this epidemic of pediatric asthma now, but we do know that asthma attacks are caused primarily by bad air days, by ozone and particulates in our air, and we know that the principal source of those materials in our atmosphere are 1,100 coal-burning power plants that are burning coal illegally. It's been illegal for 15 years. They were supposed to have cleaned up. The Clinton administration was prosecuting the 50 worst and had investigations of 70 more. But this is an industry that donated $48 million to President Bush during the 2000 campaign and has given $58 million since. And almost immediately after coming into office, this president ordered the Justice Department to drop those lawsuits and the EPA to drop those investigations. The top 3 enforcers of EPA resigned their jobs after receiving that order. The Justice Department lawyer said that this had never happened before in American history, where a presidential candidate accepts money from a criminal targeted by federal prosecutors, and then once he gets into office, orders the federal prosecutors to drop those prosecutions. Whereas the EPA says that just those 70 plants that had that were targeted by the prosecutors, just the criminal emissions from those plants alone kill 5,500 Americans every year. And then the president went and repealed the new source review provision of the Clean Air Act, the heart and soul, the most important provision of the Clean Air Act, which is the provision that requires those plants to clean up in the first place, so that now those plants will never, ever have to clean up the ozone and particulates. According to EPA, that decision alone is killing 30,000 Americans every single year, 10 World Trade Centers. This should be on the headlines every single day, but the press is ignoring it. Last week, the EPA announced that in 19 states, it is now unsafe to eat any freshwater fish in the state because of mercury contamination. In 48 states, at least some of the fish are now unsafe to eat. In fact, the only states where fish are safe to eat are Wyoming and Alaska, where the Republican-controlled legislatures refuse to authorize the money to test the fish. But in all the other states, the fish are unsafe to eat. The principal source of mercury, 60% of it is coming from those same 1,100 coal-burning power plants. We know a lot about mercury that we didn't know 10 years ago. We know, for example, that 1 out of every 6 American women now has so much mercury in her womb that her children are at risk for a grim inventory of diseases, including autism, blindness, mental retardation, heart, liver, and kidney disease. I recently had my own levels of mercury measured. My levels are about 3 times what is considered safe, just from eating fish. I was told by Dr. David Carpenter, who's the national authority on mercury contamination, that a woman with my levels of mercury in her womb would have a child with cognitive impairment. I said to him, you mean might have? And he said, no, the science is very certain she would have children with brain damage. And he estimated a permanent IQ loss on those children of 5 to 7 points over their lifetimes. There are now 630,000 children born in America every single year who have been exposed to dangerous levels of mercury in their mother's womb. Bill Clinton, recognizing this catastrophic national health epidemic, reclassified mercury as a hazardous pollutant under the Clean Air Act. That triggered a requirement that those power plants remove 90% of the mercury within 3.5 years. It would have cost them less than 1% of plant revenues to do it. But that's a great deal for the American people, but it's still billions of dollars for that industry. And this is the industry that gave over $100 million to this president. And 8 weeks ago, this White House announced that it was revoking the Clinton-era rules and substituting instead rules that were written by utility industry lawyers. And those rules will require that the utilities effectively never have to clean up that mercury. In May, I was down in West Virginia, flying over the coal fields where this coal is coming from. And if the people of this country could see what I saw, there would be a revolution in this country. We are cutting down the Appalachian Mountains. We are, with giant machines, 22 stories high, called drag lines, 2,500 tons of dynamite that are exploded every day in the state of West Virginia. We are blowing the tops off the mountains, these companies, these big multinationals, blowing the tops off the mountaintops. These historic landscapes where Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone roamed, the source of our values, our virtues, our character as a people. We're cutting them to the ground. They blow off the tops to get at the coal seams beneath, and then they plow the mountaintops, the debris and the rubble, into our streams and rivers. They've already buried 1,200 miles of streams. If this president is reelected, by the time he leaves office, they will have flattened a section of the Appalachian Mountains the size of Delaware, the whole state of Delaware. It's illegal. We went to court. You cannot, in the United States of America, put rock and debris and rubble and toxic waste into a river system without a Clean Water Act permit. And you could never get a permit to do it. And we went to court and we stopped them. We got an injunction from a federal judge against all mountaintop mining. 2 days from when Judge Hayden issued that injunction, the White House changed one word in the Clean Water Act to change the entire meaning of the act and to make it legal today in this country, in any state, to dump rock and debris and rubble into any water body without a Clean Water Act permit. They changed 30 years of Clean Water Act interpretation and opened up all of our rivers and waterways to dumping of solid waste just to please Peabody Coal and some of the other big shots in West Virginia. And today, mountaintop mining, despite our court order, is continuing apace. And this is what the issue is. You know, the White House is always trying to marginalize environmentalists by saying, you know, they're tree huggers and they're, you know, pagans who worship trees and sacrifice people, and that they're radicals. There's nothing radical about clean air and clean water. We are protecting nature, not for the sake of the fishes and the birds, but for our own sake, because we recognize that nature enriches us. It's the infrastructure of our community. And if we want to meet our obligation as a nation, as a civilization, as a generation, which is to create communities for our children that provide them with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment as the communities that our parents gave us. We've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the landscapes that enrich us, that connect us to our past, that root us in community, that provide context to our community, that are the sources of our values, our virtues, our character as a people, those things that define America for what it is. And today they're all on the auction block because of this administration. And if you ask the people who are promoting these kind of initiatives in this administration, why are you doing this? They lie and they lie and they lie. And they will not tell you what they're doing, and they're trying to mask this radical agenda from the American public. But if you talk with one of their apologists who tries to be honest and put the best face on this, what he'll tell you is, well, we have to choose now between economic prosperity on the one hand and environmental protection on the other. And that is a false choice. In 100% of the situations, good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy. If we want to measure our economy, and this is how we ought to be measuring it, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the generations, over the long term, and how it preserves the value of the assets of our community. If, on the other hand, we want to do what George Bush has been urging us to do, which is to treat the planet as if it were a business in liquidation, convert our natural resources to cash as quickly as possible, have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, we can generate an instantaneous cash flow and the illusion of a prosperous economy, but our children are going to pay for our joyride, and they're going to pay for it with denuded landscapes and poor health and huge cleanup costs that are going to amplify over time and that they'll never be able to pay. In a true free market economy, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. But what polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else. And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat who's using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market. No, we are living in a science fiction nightmare today, where we are bringing children into a world, millions of American children who are asthmatic like my kids, who are being brought into a world where the air is too poisonous for them to breathe because somebody gave money to a politician. And when they give our children asthma, they are imposing costs on the rest of us that should, in a true free market economy, be reflected in the price of that company's product when it makes it to market. And what I do as an environmental activist is I go out into the market and I catch the cheaters. I don't even consider myself an environmentalist anymore. I'm a free marketeer. I go out and I catch the cheaters and I say to them, we're going to force you to internalize your costs the same way that you're internalizing your profits. Because as long as somebody cheats the free market, none of us, by polluting, none of us gets the advantages of the efficiency and the democracy that the marketplace promises our country. And we have to understand as an American people that there's a huge difference between free market capitalism, which democratizes our country, which makes us more prosperous and efficient, and the kind of corporate crony capitalism that has been embraced by this administration, which is as antithetical to democracy in America as it is in Nigeria. You know, when I traveled all over Europe when I was a little boy with my father and with President Kennedy, and I saw these huge crowds, and I saw how, they were so proud in Europe to name their streets after our presidents, after Teddy Roosevelt, and John Kennedy, and George Washington, and how we were the moral authority of the world. And it took us 300 years to establish that reputation. And in 3.5 years, this president has completely destroyed it. From $5 trillion surplus that Bill Clinton left us to a $5 trillion deficit, a $10 trillion shift in wealth, and almost all of it from the poor to the rich, in all these various ways that he's figured out, of Halliburton, and all of these nefarious ways that he's figured out how to shift the wealth of this country to the richest people in our country. And I was raised in a milieu where I was taught that communism leads to dictatorship and that capitalism leads to democracy. But it's not that simple. Americans have to understand the difference between free market capitalism, which benefits our country, and this kind of corporate crony capitalism where we have large corporations running our government, and there's a name for that, and the name is fascism. And Franklin Roosevelt said that. He said fascism is the control of government by large corporations for their own benefit. And I close with this, I have an American Heritage Dictionary, the last edition, which I keep at home, which says it defines fascism as the control of government by large corporations with right-wing ideology driven by bellicose nationalism. If that sounds familiar to you,